Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into a debate that really gets to the core of who you are. It asks one of the most fundamental questions about the human mind itself.
Think of it as the ultimate nature versus nurture question, but with a twist. It all started when Carl Jung threw this just radical idea out there. Then people like Anthony Stevens came along and tried to pin it down with science, dragging the whole question out of the realm of pure philosophy and dropping it right into the lap of modern psychology.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this whole debate, we've got to go back to the beginning. We need to start with the man himself, Carl Jung, and his brilliant but, let's be honest, scientifically puzzling idea, the archetype.
So Jung's idea was pretty out there. He basically said that we're all born with this shared psychic inheritance. We're not talking about your personal memories, no. He meant these innate universal structures, almost like a psychological DNA that we all share. This DNA, he argued, shapes everything, our myths, our dreams, our most primal reactions to the world. But here's where it gets tricky. The core problem? Jung himself. He was, well, all over the place. One minute, he's saying an archetype was the instinct's perception of itself, super close to our biology. The next minute, he's calling it the most polar opposite imaginable, pitting spirit against nature. This vagueness, this ambiguity, it left his incredible idea just kind of floating out there without any real scientific anchor to hold it down.
And that's our cue for the next major player to step onto the stage, the psychiatrist Anthony Stevens. Now, Stevens had this one single, incredibly audacious goal for his entire career. He was going to take Jung's kind of mystical concept and bolt it firmly to the bedrock of evolutionary biology.
You know, it was just a single statement he heard from his own analyst that completely changed his life. For Stevens, this wasn't just some abstract theory. No, this was the key to finally making psychology a true biological science. It was the missing link between Jung and Darwin, and boom, it set the entire course for the rest of his life's work.
So how did he do it? Well, to build his case, Stevens looked to the animal kingdom. He dove into ethology, which is just the study of animal behavior, and he keyed in on this really cool concept called an innate releasing mechanism, or IRM. Think about it like this. A robin sees a tuft of red feathers. It doesn't think, it just attacks, because it's hardwired to see red as a rival. The red color is the key that unlocks or releases that pre-programmed aggressive behavior.
Okay, so Stevens then went back to Jung's original work, and he zeroed in on this really crucial distinction that Jung himself had made. It's the difference between what Jung called the archetype as such and the archetypal image. It's basically the blueprint versus the final building, right? The archetype as such is the raw, inherited potential, the blueprint. But the final building, the image we actually see, that gets shaped by our culture, our language, our personal lives.
And this is what led to Stevens' big revolutionary move. He made the connection. He argued that the archetype as such, that raw blueprint, is the human version of an IRM. It's an evolved circuit in our brain, hardwired to fire in response to universal human situations. Things like motherhood, or facing a predator, or falling in love. All of a sudden, the archetype wasn't some mystical floating concept anymore. It was a biological adaptation, forged by natural selection.
But here's the thing. By giving the archetype a hard, biological definition, Stevens didn't end the conversation. Not even close. In fact, he threw gasoline on the fire. He ignited this fierce, but also incredibly productive academic debate that totally reshaped the field, and honestly, it's still going on today.
So Stevens' work basically shattered the field into three main camps. First, you have the innatists. They're Team Stevens. They believe archetypes are innate, they're biological hardware we're born with. Then you have the culturalists, folks like Pietikainen, who say, whoa, not so fast. Archetypes are more like software. They're symbolic patterns we learn from our culture. And then there's a third group, the emergentist, and they came in with a totally different take.
And this really gets us to the heart of the conflict. What is an archetype at its core? Is it like Stevens thought, a preloaded program in our brains just waiting for the right trigger? Or is it something else? Something that isn't preloaded at all, but a pattern that only emerges from this incredibly complex dance between our brain, our world, and the stories we tell ourselves.
This is where George Hogenson's idea comes in, and it's just a brilliant third way of looking at it. From his perspective, archetypes aren't these fixed things we have in our genes. Instead, they're recurring patterns that just happen when all these complex systems, our biology, our culture, our language, all interact. It's less like a blueprint for a house and more like the way a river carves a canyon. The pattern is predictable, it's powerful, but it wasn't there to begin with. You know, this whole debate, it became the central theme, the organizing principle of Anthony Stevens' entire career. And he actually summarized his whole intellectual journey beautifully through a really powerful dream he once had.
And he said he understood the dream the moment he woke up. The savannah, that's the ancestral home, right? The archetypal landscape where humanity grew up. But the rainbow splitting into 3 distinct, vibrant arches, for him, that was it. That was the map of his life's work.
So let's look at these 3 arcs because they really show the progression of his thinking. First, he started with our shared biological heritage, what he called our 2-million-year-old self. Then, Arc 2, he zoomed in on the individual, looking at how these ancient blueprints play out in our personal, symbolic lives. And finally, for the 3rd arc, he zoomed all the way out to look at the collective, how archetypes could help us understand massive social phenomena, like cults or even the roots of war and terror.
So, when all is said and done, did Stevens settle the debate? Nope. But honestly, I don't think that was ever his real goal. His true legacy wasn't in having the last word. It was in asking the right question. He forced psychology, a field that can sometimes drift off into the purely spiritual, to get its hands dirty and take biology seriously. He made it impossible to ignore the matter in our minds.
And you get the sense he was perfectly happy with that. He wasn't looking for a final, neat answer. He loved the journey of the inquiry itself. And he followed that path with just incredible passion and intellectual rigor right up until he died at age 90, saying he had no regrets because he just plain enjoyed the trip.
And so, the very question that Stevens dragged into the light of day, it's still with us. What is the fundamental nature of our psyche? Is it an ancient, hardwired inheritance? Is it a story written by our culture? Or is it something more like a symphony, a beautiful pattern that only emerges when our biology and our culture finally meet? It really is one of the deepest questions we can ask about ourselves. And thanks to Stevens, that debate is very much alive.